Welcome to Guilty Pleasure Stories channel that we hope you will have fun with us. Enjoy watching. My name is Daisy and my life always seemed ordinary from the outside. Small town girl, doting parents, and a house that looked like it came straight out of a suburban dream. But as is often the case, the surface rarely tells the whole story beneath the picture. Perfect image. Our family was a constellation of emotions, unspoken feelings that lingered in the shadows. My father, Charlie, was the kind of man who drew attention without trying. He was sharp, well-read, and always had a way of making people feel seen. Everyone in our little town admired him. To me, he was more than just a parent. Growing up, he was my anchor, my confidant. My hero. Mom was the nurturing one, but Dad, he was magnetic. He wasn't just a father. He was someone you wanted to be around. I followed him everywhere as a child, soaking up his world of stories, advice and laughter. But as I grew older, the lines of our relationship ***s became harder to define and the weight of it grew heavier. When I turned 17, everything began to shift. It was the summer after I graduated high school, and the house felt emptier than ever. Mom had started taking long trips for work, a consulting job she adored, but one that left Dad and me alone more than I expected. At first it was normal, shared dinners, quiet nights, watching LED TV, but over time the air between us began to change. I first noticed it in the little things. The way his gaze would linger on me during breakfast, how he'd laugh a little too easily at my jokes, or how often he'd find reasons for us to spend time together. I told myself it was nothing. We'd always been close, that was normal, wasn't it? But then came the looks. One evening, after a particularly stifling day of heat, I stepped out of my room wearing a sundress. It wasn't unusual for me to wear things like that. It was summer after all. But when I walked into the living room, Dad's reaction startled me. "You look beautiful," he said softly, almost as if the words escaped before he could catch them. It wasn't the kind of compliment I was used to. There was something different in his tone, something that made my heart skip. I felt my cheeks flush, and for a moment I couldn't meet his eyes. "Thanks," I mumbled, trying to sound casual as I busied myself with something on the counter. His gaze didn't leave me, and I could feel the weight of it, even with my back turned. The days that followed were filled with a confusing tension I couldn't shake. We spent more time together than ever before, playing cards on the porch, taking late-night walks under the stars, even cooking side by side in the kitchen. And yet there was an unspoken energy between us, something we never addressed. But both felt one night after Mom called to say she'd be gone for another week. Dad suggested we watch a movie, pick something fun. He said, his voice unusually warm as he settled onto the couch. I chose a light-hearted rom-com, hoping it would fill the U.S. But as the movie played, I'd focused the screen there beside him, the closeness of the space, the quiet moments of shared laughter. It all felt heavy, like we were walking a fine line. Neither of us dared to cross. At 3 point, his hand brushed against mine as we reached for the popcorn. The touch was brief, almost accidental, but it sent a spark through me. I pulled my hand back quickly, hoping he wouldn't notice the way my breath hitched, but he did. He turned to me, his expression soft yet unreadable. "Daisy," he said quietly, his voice low and steady. "Yeah." His eyes searched mine, and for a moment I thought he was going to say something. But instead he smiled faintly and shook his head. "Nothing," he said, leaning back against the couch that night. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't shake the way he had looked at me, like there was something he wanted to say but couldn't. It was maddening, this strange dance we were caught in, half light, half shadow, neither of us willing to admit what was happening. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, that I was overthinking, but deep down I knew better because I felt it too. The connection between us wasn't the same as it had been before. It was growing, changing, becoming something I didn't know how to handle, and the worst part, one wasn't sure I wanted it to stop. The following days passed in a blur of routine, but everything between Dad and me felt amplified. Every glance, every touch, every unspoken word. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself it was everything. Mom called often, her voice bright and oblivious to the subtle tension weaving through our house. "Make sure your dad doesn't spend all day in the garage," she'd say with a chuckle. "He'll tinker himself into oblivion. If you let him, of course." "Mom," I'd reply, forcing cheer into my voice. But every time I hung up, the house seemed quieter, heavier, as if her absence echoed louder than her presence ever did. One evening, the summer heat refused to relent. The air was sticky, even as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the backyard in soft golden light. I was sitting on the porch swing, swaying lazily when Dad stepped outside, 2 glasses of lemonade in hand. "Thought you might be thirsty," he said, handing one to me. "Thanks," I'd taking the glass. He settled into the chair beside me, his unhurried, his lingering on the dark sky for a while, we in silence. The only sound, the rhythmic siari of a swing and the distant hum of cicadas. "You've grown up so fast," he said, suddenly his voice tinged with something I couldn't place. I glanced at him, unsure how to respond. "I guess that's what happens," I said lightly, though my C***** T tightened at his words. He turned to me then, his expression serious. "No, I mean it. It feels like just yesterday you were running around the yard, climbing trees and coming home, covered in dirt." He chuckled softly, but his eyes were far away, as if lost in the memory. "Now you're well, look at you." My cheeks flushed under his, and I looked down, tracing the rim of my glass with my finger. "Dad," I said, half laughing. "You're making me sound like a stranger." "Not a stranger," he said quickly, never that, but different the way he said. It made my PSE quicken. I dared at him, and found his eyes on me steady and unwavering. There was no mistaking the weight of his words, or the way they made my stomach flutter. That night I couldn't sleep. I replayed the conversation over and over in my mind, dissecting every word, every look. Was it just me, or had something shifted again? Was I reading too much into it? Or was there truly something there? Something unspoken but undeniable. I hated how much I wanted it to be real. The next morning I found him in the kitchen, his hands definitely chopping vegetables for breakfast. The sight caught me off guard. Dad wasn't usually one for cooking. "Since when do you make omelets?" I asked. Leaning against the counter with a teasing smile, he glanced up at me, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Since today, thought I'd give you a break." I laughed softly, watching as he moved with surprising ease. There was something oddly intimate about the scene. The early morning light streaming through the window, the quiet clatter of utensils, the smell of eggs and spices filling the air. "Here," he said, sliding a plate toward me. "Let me know if it's edible." I took a bite, nodding in approval. "Not that I said you might have a future." In this he laughed, a low, warm sound that made my C**** T ache for the rest of the meal. We talked about nothing and everything. College plans, the weather, the neighbor's unruly dog. But beneath the casual banter, I felt the undercurrent of something deeper, something we weren't addressing. That evening, the tension reached a tipping point. We were watching another movie, something neither of us was paying much attention to, when a sudden power outage plunged the house into darkness. "Great," I muttered, fumbling for my phone's flashlight. "Hang on," Dad said, his voice calm and steady. A moment later, I heard him strike a match, and the soft glow of a candle lit up the room. "There," he said, setting it on the coffee table. "Not so bad." The flickering light cast shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp lines of his jaw and the intensity in his eyes. I swallowed hard, suddenly hyper-aware of how close we were sitting. "Guess we'll have to entertain ourselves," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He chuckled low and deep. "Any ideas?" I shook my head, my heart pounding. "I don't know, talk." I guess. He leaned back against the couch, his gaze never leaving mine. "All right, talk." But I couldn't think of a single thing to say. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy, until he finally broke it. "You mean the world to me, Daisy," he said quietly. "You know that, right?" "I know," I whispered, my throat tight. "No," he said, leaning forward, his eyes searching mine. "I mean it. You're everything." The words hung in the air, charged and impossible to ignore. My breath hitched, and I felt the weight of his gaze, the unspoken emotion swirling between us. "Dad," I began, but my voice faltered. He reached out, then his hand brushing against mine. The touch was soft, hesitant, but it sent George through me all the same. "I'm sorry," he said, pulling back quickly, his face a mix of regret and something else, something deeper. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with everything we couldn't bring ourselves to admit. "Shall I continue? Let me know if you like the story to evolve in a specific way." The power outage was brief, But the charged silence it left behind lingered long after the lights flickered back on Dad and I sat there, the glow of the LED TV returning to life. But neither of us moved. It was as though the invisible thread tethering us had tightened, pulling us closer to a boundary we couldn't define but knew existed. "Daisy," he said. Finally, his voice low, almost hoarse. I turned to him, heart pounding so loudly I wondered if he could hear it too. "Yeah," he opened his mouth, then closed it again, his brow furrowing. "Never mind," he said, standing abruptly. "It's late. You should get some sleep." I watched him retreat down the hallway, his shoulders tense, his steps heavier than usual. For a moment I sat frozen, unsure whether to follow or let him go, but the pull was too strong to resist. The house was quiet as I made my way toward his study, with a faint light spilling from beneath the door guided me. I hesitated outside, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Before I could second-guess myself, I knocked softly. "Come in," he called, his voice. When I pushed the door, he desk flicker across his face. "Daisy, what's wrong?" I just wanted to talk," I said, stepping inside and closing the door behind me. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. "About what?" I hesitated, searching for the right words. "About us." His expression shifted, his jaw tightening. "Daisy, I don't think I feel it too," I blurted out, my voice trembling. He froze, his hand stilling against his temple for a moment. Neither of us spoke, the weight of my admission hanging heavily in the air. "Daisy," he said, my name like a warning, but his voice softened almost immediately. "We can't." "Why not?" I challenged, stepping closer. He stood towering over me. "Face a storm of emotions because it's not right," he said, his voice breaking. "You know that." I looked up at him, my C***** T tight, "but it feels right, doesn't it?" His breath hitched, and for a brief, heart-stopping moment I thought he might agree. But then he shook his head, stepping back as though the distance could erase what was happening. "I'm your father," he said, as if reminding himself. "You're more than that." I whispered. "We didn't talk about it again for days." Days life went on, or at least we pretended it did. But the tension between us only grew, a constant unspoken presence that shadowed our every interaction. Each time our eyes met across the dinner table or our hands brushed in passing, I felt the undeniable connection we were both trying so desperately to ignore. I thought I could handle it, that I could bury my feelings and move on. But the harder I tried to suppress them, the stronger they became. And then one night everything changed. It was late and the house was silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I had gone to the kitchen for a glass of water when I heard his voice. "Daisy." I turned to see him standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted, stepping inside me. "Neither," I said softly. He leaned against the counter, his arms crossed over his C******. "Do you want to talk?" I nodded, my throat too tight for words. We ended up in the living room, the soft glow of the moonlight streaming through the curtains, casting shadows across his face. For a while, we just sat there, the silence stretching between us, heavy with everything. "We weren't saying I've been trying to figure this out," he said. Finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "trying to make sense of what I'm feeling, but I can't." My hearted. As I looked at him, his eyes clouded with confusion and something deeper, something that mirrored my own emotions. "I don't want to make things harder for you," he continued, his voice breaking, "but I can't pretend I don't feel it anymore." My breath caught, and before I could stop myself, I reached out, my hand brushing against his knee. "Neither," I whispered. He looked at me, then really looked at me, and for a moment the world seemed to stand still. "Daisy," he said, his voice trembling, "if we do this, there's no going back." "I know," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "But I don't want to go back." What happened next felt inevitable, like the culmination of everything we've been dancing around for weeks. His hand found mine, his touch tentative but electric, sending shivers down my spine for a moment. We just sat there, holding onto each other as though the world outside didn't exist. But then he leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. "We shouldn't," he murmured, though his voice lacked conviction. "But we will," I replied, my voice barely audible. And then, as if drawn by some unseen force, he closed the distance between us. The K****s was soft at first, hesitant and unsure, but it quickly deepened. fueled by weeks of unspoken tension. My hands found their way to his shoulders, his to my waist, and for the first time I felt completely untethered, free from the weight of everything that had held me back. When we finally pulled away, his eyes searched mine, a mixture of fear and longing reflected in his "What are we doing?" He whispered something we can't take back. I said, my voice trembling. He exhaled shakily, his hand still resting on my H**SS. I don't know where this is going, Daisy, but I can't stop. Then don't. I said simply bye. Make sure to subscribe to my channel so I can continue bringing you more fascinating true crime stories like this one, and don't forget to watch this video till the end.
One day I came home from class early to find Aurora alone in the house. She was cuddled up on the couch with a book, appearing surprised as I strolled in. "I didn't expect you to be home so early," she replied, her voice full of astonishment. "The professor canceled class," I stated, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "Where is Dad?" I asked. Aurora answered, frustrated, "Working late again." I could tell how exhausted she was and how much she missed him. Without thinking, I walked to sit next to her on the couch. "Are things not going well?" I inquired gently, hoping to reach out. Claire offered me a sorrowful grin. "I'm trying, Michael. I truly am. But sometimes I wonder if it's enough or if we've gone too far." Despite everything, I felt a sense of pity for her. She was truly trying to work things out, but it was evident that her relationship with Thomas was strained. "I apologized," I said, reaching out to console her when my palm contacted hers. I felt a surge of energy, an intensity that terrified me. Aurora must have felt it as well, as she hastily withdrew her hand away. "I should prepare supper," she muttered, her voice cracking as she dashed to the kitchen. I sat there with my heart beating. What was that? Why did I respond that strongly to such a simple touch? I retired to my room, my mind in turmoil. I had assumed we had moved on from everything and that we could put that night behind us. However, there were still unresolved sentiments simmering beneath the surface that night. I stayed awake for hours, struggling with my conscience. I knew my emotions weren't right. Aurora was my stepmother and my father's wife, but I couldn't ignore the attraction I had for her and how my body responded to her presence. I thought of Dad and how unaware he was of everything that was going on right in front of him. I thought of Aurora, who was imprisoned in a failing marriage, and I thought of myself caught in the midst of it all, perplexed and unprepared. As daylight dawned, I came to a conclusion. I couldn't continue to live this way, cautiously navigating my own home. I needed to get away and clear my brain. I started packing a suitcase, hoping that getting away from everything would help me figure things out. I could stay with a buddy and finish my remaining few classes. As I zipped up my backpack, I heard activity in the corridor. Aurora was up, presumably beginning her morning ritual. I took a deep breath, ready for the painful talk that was ahead. I had to inform her I was leaving and explain why it wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. After one last look around my room, I opened the door, prepared to face whatever was next. Little did I realize that the most painful portion of my odyssey lay ahead. As I walked into the hallway, Rusa draped over my shoulder. I almost collided with Aurora. She was walking to the kitchen, still in her robe, her hair unkempt from sleep. When she spotted me, her eyes widened as she noticed my packed luggage and resolute expression on my face. "Michael," she inquired, her voice tense and concerned. "What's happening?" I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the talk. "I'm leaving," I murmured, my voice firm despite the emotions coursing through me. "I believe it is better if I stay with a buddy for a bit." Aurora's face sank as a mixture of comprehension and despair washed over her. "Michael," she said gently, "is this because of yesterday, because of us?" I nodded but could not meet her look. "It isn't just yesterday. It is everything. I can't keep pretending. Everything is normal when it isn't, and I need some space to think things through." She stretched out as if to grasp my arm, but her hand dropped limply to her side. "I understand," she murmured gently, "but might we discuss this first? Dad will be crushed if you go without an explanation." In my haste to depart, I failed to think how this might hurt Dad. The weight of it all suddenly became. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, and leave a comment. If you enjoyed this story,